G'day everyone, welcome to today's episode of the podcast. Today I'm speaking to an amazing producer, a guy called Nick Franklin. Nick is from Sydney. He's a phenomenal producer, multi-instrumentalist. He's an artist. He designs his own electronics, and he's just a fantastic dude. We had a really great chat. So sit back and relax and enjoy my chat with the awesome Nick Franklin. You and I have been thrust into a similar situation recently, which is we both had a studio space for a number of years, and then our respective landlords wanted to do something else with that space, and we both found ourselves, out of our studio, and in my case, working from home up in Foster.
Yeah.
How's that been going for you? Do you want to talk me through that process?
Yeah. So it's been an interesting. It's probably been one of the biggest adjustments I've experienced in my adult life, honestly. So like you, we were renting a commercial studio space. We actually built it, so that was a whole thing. What we were actually renting was about 30 square meters of empty warehouse space, and it was a great spot. I was renting from Rick O'Neill, who you know, of course, and I was in the same building with Steve Francis, who you also know, and it's an amazing spot. And I think it was the first time. I'd rented studios before that. I had one in Castlereagh Street where Don Bartley's old room was, and I've had commercial studios, but it was the first one that really felt like it was my second home. It was my spot. We built it with our hands. It was imperfect in so many ways, but it was like it was ours, and it didn't last as long as we'd kind of expected, it was quite shocking when we found out, and I'm sure it's a feeling you can relate to, that, there's a deadline on when you've got to get out of there. And it was scary because not only did I not know where I was going to work, which was was a concern in and of itself, but I sort of felt like at the time, which I've learned is not really the case, that my identity and my presence in the kind of industry was somehow tied up with the walls of that spot. Like I thought, are people even going to want to work with me anymore? Will I still feel like I'm in the music industry when we tear these walls down? And, it all kind of happened as it did for you, like right in the middle of this weird COVID situation we've been kind of going through. So it was just
COVID?
So it was just it was a strange period. The initial actual moving out was so all consuming. I don't think I had a chance to step back and realize what was really kind of happening. I mean, we tore the whole studio down in a sort of a month, and then all of a sudden, as the dust settled, I was like, oh shit, I guess I work at home now. And it was weird, but really quickly, like like in the space of like 10 days, I was like, oh man, this is great. This is actually good. I had this kind of realization that there was new ways of making music that I had been kind of, just sort of ignoring and not paying attention to, because I've always been the person that if you record drums, the way to do it is you go to a studio, you hire the studio, I put the microphones on the drums, do the full bit, and then with no space to do anything like that, I started straight away. I'll send stuff to Miles, and he's got a great studio, so he can, and he gets the sounds that I like. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, that was like way cheaper and easier and way less stressful than going to a studio. So I kind of embraced it quite quickly. The only logistical issue was my partner Jess and I were living together in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we were trying to share our second bedroom as like my new studio space, also her workspace. And it just wasn't working. So we moved house quite quickly after we closed the studio so that I could have a room and she could have a dedicated room for her work stuff. And it's funny. I've gone from kind of being like, I've always going to have a commercial studio space to, I could totally do it without one, So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but I actually have come full circle, and I have a studio at home and a sort of rented space that I share with someone now. But it's been
okay.
Yeah. So
where's that?
Been in Piermont on Harris Street. Yeah. So I share with Guy, who's long-term friend, and we used to play in a band together. I guess technically we still play in a band together. We've never officially broken up.
Nice.
But so I still have a couple of days a week at a commercial spot now, because I don't really think I'm going to go down the road of having people to the house, just because I don't think it just doesn't really suit us, and I don't want to, I'm sure it would be fine with people that I know and like, but I do like the idea of if it's just strangers, that I can go somewhere else that's not here, and Jess doesn't have to make small talk with weirdos coming through our house.
Musos. Yeah. And so,
exactly.
Because you're a drummer and you're a multi-instrumentalist, right? So the hard thing is probably not having the drum kit set up and at your disposal 24 hours a day, right?
Yeah, that's that's something that I kind of come and go on, and I think that's something that, I don't know, is in my personality. I'll go through these little periods of obsession all the time, and sometimes, for a while it was drums. Like I was just like buying snares and like playing the drums all the time, and then I was bought all these mics. Like I was just going crazy about the drums for a little while, and like just as soon as that comes on, I'll just kind of lose my interest in the drums for a little while and go to something else. So I don't sort of feel the kind of burning, desire to get on a drum kit all the time now. Maybe I would play it if it was set up. But a lot of what I do is just tinkering around on guitars or, whatever else. And, with the exception of playing a drum set, I can do everything here, like it's
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. So speaking of guitars, are you, and particularly since you've moved, are you an amp guy or an amp sim guy right now?
Oh, I think I'm split down the middle a little bit. If you'd asked me that question a year ago, I would have 100% said amp sims are shit and that you have to record real guitar. I think I've been scarred, right? So like some of the first software I ever got was like my guitar teacher gave me on a burned compact disc. He gave me a pirated copy of Cubase and like a pirated copy of like Guitar Rig. Then this is like, I want to say maybe around 2001, 2002. Now, in my brain, that's what amp sims sound like.
Yeah. You've got that hangover from it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I just, a lot of the kind of music especially that I used to work on, the guitar players in those bands just wouldn't be caught dead playing through amp sims. Like it just wasn't their vibe. Like a lot of them would have an amp that they really liked, or they were enamored with the idea of old, Fender amps or whatever. And so it wasn't really always an option for me to go like, why don't we try an amp sim? And I felt pretty strongly for a long while that, the only way I would really record guitars properly was to use a real amp. But then being forced to some degree to sort of not make as much noise, I suppose, is the main thing. Last year I started exploring it a little bit more, and I kind of came to that conclusion that I have with all of the instruments, is it doesn't actually matter at all. I mean, of course it matters. I mean, gear's cool, whatever, I'm just not that fussed. I'm not the most amazing guitar player, but like I think because I've recorded so much, my touch is appropriate for recording. Like I get how to hold a chord so it's not out of tune, and I can pick consistently and I can play in time. Honestly, that just DI'd with no amp sim sounds better to me than someone hacking away through the world's best amp.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know. I still really like. I've got a 70s Vibrolux, and like I love playing through it. It feels nice to play through. But for recording purposes now, I'll just I'll load up an amp sim, and use Neural DSP or The other one I've got, I don't remember the name of it anyway. But yeah, I hate to sound apathetic towards gear, but I think the older I get and the more into it, I realize it actually doesn't really matter, you know?
Yeah. And you look at the people that are kind of making the big pop records, which are probably the best sounding records on the planet.
100%.
And they're not sitting there going, you know, we have to have a real kit, we have to have a real guitar. They don't give a fuck. It's just got to sound great.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't really matter what how you get there, as long as the sound coming out of the speakers is cool. I actually just mastered something for that Pete Holtz had produced, and you know, I've always kind of, same with, you know, amp sims kind of go in the same basket as program drums for me. Like, I used to be quite opposed to it because the sounds that I would hear were very like American country or like super slamming metal kind of sounds, and I didn't really vibe with that. And I heard this track that Pete Holtz had produced and mixed, and I phoned him and I said, "Did you do these drums in your little booth there?" And he's like, that's just programmed drums. That's just, you know, whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. All right. Well, we're at the point where I was like 100% convinced what I was hearing was a drummer playing a drum set. You know,
absolutely. So yeah.
I think we've just hit the point where it doesn't really matter how you know, you can get whatever sound, you know, and I think it's great because it enables people that, you know, don't have the budget to go to a huge studio and do a day of drums, or you know, want to make music at their house, you know what I mean, and can't set up a drum set. Like, you know, there's all these tools now where you can, you know, pretty much make studio records in your headphones, you know.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, for me, coming up here and working, I'm in a unit, so I've got to keep an eye on volume.
Yeah.
And I've done so much more mixing on headphones, and it has revolutionized my mixing, I reckon.
Yeah, right.
For me now, I pay a lot more attention to finer details of panning than I did when I just was mixing on monitors.
Yeah.
How do you find mixing on headphones, or is that something you've always done a lot of?
I kind of come and go. I think I still need to check on the speakers, just because a handful of times I've done a whole mix, and then when I get it somewhere where I know and I'm on my speakers, I'm really confused about some of the decisions that I've made. I don't know, but sometimes for me as well, I get kind of like, I don't know, like mixing for me is it's like an emotional experience in a way. Like sometimes it's like my absolute happy place. Like if I'm in the right mood, like I'm sometimes like just so excited to get started on a mix. And sometimes those days I'll just mix for like 3 hours and I'm like, boom, that is done. Like I feel 100% confident with that. And then other days I take like 4 running starts at it and I'm like, why won't this thing come together? And I'm having a freak out. Like I ride these really deep waves of like, am I even a mixer? Or, you know, like.
Exactly.
And so just a few times a while ago, like a few years ago, I tried doing a lot of mixing on headphones and they kind of they didn't go that well. So I still kind of have associations with being a bit scared to send out stuff that I mostly worked on headphones.
Right.
So headphones for me is like probably a 20% of the mix time thing, and then probably speakers the rest of the time. I don't like being tethered to the cord. It's like a weird thing, but I like rolling my chair around over to the keyboard or grabbing my guitar, and you know, I'm forever just like getting tangled up in shit.
Whoever thought that this was a good idea for headphones.
No,
I mean,
so
I know a lot of, you know, you see a lot of indie bands live and they've got the coiled guitar leads because they look cool, presumably, but they are a pain in the ass. I've got a really, really long headphone extension, so I can kind of wheel my way around the room, even, you know, being wired up to the headphones.
I feel like I want...
But
like
I hate the bloody coil.
Yeah, the coil's a nightmare. I've just got the straight one, the really long straight, so I can kind of like
Nice.
get around as well. I think they should invent like a some people have for their garden hose, like they should have one that retracts into a thing when you don't want all
I'm
the cord.
sure it's been invented. I'm sure of that. It's just for whatever reason the headphone manufacturers probably just went, too hard.
Too hard.
Let them deal with their bloody coiled leads.
They probably want us to break the headphone cables so that we got to buy the replacements.
Yeah, exactly. You were talking before about having that touch, on the guitar. A very dear friend of mine and a fantastic musician and engineer, David Richards, was touring, and his band was supporting Jeff Beck.
Yeah, right.
And he's a massive, massive Jeff Beck fan, and he said he was backstage and he was playing one of Jeff Beck's songs, just noodling around, and Jeff heard it and said, "Would you like to play through my rig?" And he said, "Oh, I'd love to." So Jeff takes him out onto the stage, and David plugs in Jeff's guitar into Jeff's pedal board, into, the whole bits and pieces. And he said, and I started playing, and he said, and it sounded like me.
Amazing.
It didn't sound like
true.
Jeff Beck.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's all in the fingers, right?
Oh man, 100%. And it goes for every instrument. I'm on drum sessions. I tend to be kind of overly prepared. Like I'll ask a band to come in at 11, for a drum day, but I'm there at 8:30 or 9. I like the room to be perfect. I like,
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a nerd with this stuff. Like, I'm going to change all the skins. I'm going to get it feeling great. And when I do those big drum days, I've got this assistant, Matt, and he's great. He's like a second me now. Like I've got him to the point where I can go into the room and play the drums, and he'll dial all the pre's to kind of where I would like them and yada yada. We'll get a drum sound that is like, I'm like, cool, today's going to be a blast. It sounds awesome. I'm happy. And then depending on the drummer that walks in that day, it changes completely. Like it does. All of a sudden,
Totally.
this drum sound that I thought was amazing, it's just not working anymore. It really is that simple. It's the person playing.
Absolutely.
It's all nice to have the good pre's and the good compressors and yada yada. But at the end of the day, it's really comes down to the person operating the thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the expertise, but also I think one thing I'm noticing more and more is it's just the attention to detail that you put in.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, you've met Lou, right? You did some piano for Lewis Mitchell the other day. Like
Yeah.
He I used to think he was nuts because he works primarily in the kind of pop world, label kind of stuff, and he would talk to me about these things he would do when he's editing vocals, and I'm like, man, you're crazy. Like that's just so much time and so much effort. But I realized like that's actually what it takes to get a vocal that sounds like those records. You have to. He's in there moving things by 10 milliseconds to make it feel a little bit better when they land on that one word, and moving tiny tune and turning a breath down 3 dB and yada yada yada.
Exactly.
until it is just perfect, because that is the benchmark for pop vocals now. It has to be perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's right. It's those details. It's like, are you landing on the beat? Are you landing after the beat? Are you landing slightly ahead of the beat to make it feel kind of anxious? Like these little details. It's really where it's at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. How close do you feel you've gotten to nailing this whole gig?
If the gig is solely music production, then like so far from where I would want to be. But I think about this a lot, right? Like I reckon I could be a heaps better music producer now if this was all I had dedicated my time to doing. Like, and sometimes I have weird emotions about that. Like I look sometimes at my friends who work on music that people have heard of, and music that and you know what I mean, and I think I wonder if I would feel more proud of myself or whole or more satisfied with my music career if I had spent every waking moment of my 20s just trying to hustle into that world and had just not taken days off and just gone hard in that world. But that's not really what I've done. And on other days, I'm really, glad that it's not what I did, because, I live this crazy, weird life now where one day I'm producing music, the next day I'm developing a new circuit for a product that we're going to release. Another day I was saying before, like I go through these like mad obsessive phases where like, I'll just be like, I need to learn how to do woodwork. That's what I want to do. And, it'll be like, I'll just build a million wood projects. And that's just how
that's because of, is that endless curiosity or is it restlessness? What do you think fuels that?
I think
Do you
it's a
get
little
bored?
bit yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so funny. I'll be like so stressed and burnt out, and we'll have a holiday coming up, and I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I need. And then like 2 days into the holiday, I'm just on my phone like scrolling. I'm like, oh, that EQ circuit could work in our, I mean, I think I do. I know one thing for sure: doing the same thing every day doesn't work for me. Like my brain just isn't wired that way. I used to teach full time at JMC. Not so much a teaching role, but like a managerial position. And going to the same place for the same hours every day, it drives me insane. I'll just start looking for things to do elsewhere. I can't really do that. And so, where I've kind of got myself to now, I'm in this position where my week is like loosely structured around going to the studio on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but I don't always. If there's not something particular that I need to do and I wake up inspired to try and design a new distortion or, to completely pull all the cables out of my studio and redo them or whatever, like I'll do that because, doing all these little things is what, I don't know, that's just how my brain works. And it actually keeps me more excited about when I do, go into the studio. If I've just been doing that for 10 days straight, I'm not going to be inspired on that 10th day. Like I like doing all different kind of things. So to answer your question,
like an ADHD there?
Oh, possibly. It's funny how do you see all these? You see a lot more content about ADHD now, and how I suppose they're getting better at recognizing. And my friend Connor was recently diagnosed as an adult, and I see his Instagram stories, these funny little pictorials about, the symptoms of ADHD. And I'm like, hang on, that's what I do. But I think everyone to some degree, has these things, right? One thing they talk about with ADHD is like obsessing over something for a while and then just putting it down and like forgetting about it. And that aspect I definitely have. I always circle back around. Like right now I'm obsessed with electronics. Like I'm in a real learning phase again. I've been like, just designing circuits and, just learning and going crazy on that. But in the 6 months prior to that, I was really not, I kind of wasn't into doing that stuff as much in that kind of moment. So yeah, I don't know. I just kind of float around between my different passions and.
Well, you've created a couple of products that have. Look, you can tell me, but they seem from an outsider's point of view like they're doing pretty well, and you seem to be selling out of each run of them, and so that's that's awesome. Do you want to talk about those products? Do a little bit of a sell for us?
Oh yes, here's my chance. That's why I came on the podcast.
That's what. Yeah. You didn't want to talk to a prick like me.
So that came about because, actually, I've actually always sold electronics, pretty much since 2006, 7.
Okay.
But it was always one-off, custom to the specifications of the customer. It started with monitor controllers because back then it's weird. Like nowadays, every interface has a volume control on it, pretty much. Back then, I think home studios were less of a thing, and I think also studios were just starting to make that transition between console and going kind of in the box at that time. And so everyone used to use the volume control on their console to turn the speakers up and down, right? Like that was the thing. And then all of a sudden, if you take the console out of the equation, or you just start using your console as mic pre's and just not mixing on it, like you need a way of turning your speakers up and down. And there were options at the time that, like the Mackie Big Knob did exist back then, and like there were Central Station and all those things, but they all had they had their own quirks. But the main thing was that like it's actually really hard to design a monitor controller that suits everybody, right? Because like you know, in my studio, you know, the maximum number of headphones I'm ever going to want to do separate mixes for is 2, you know, whereas in someone else's studio, they might have another thing, or someone wants to be able to plug in 5 sets of studio monitors or whatever it is. You know, everyone has their own has their own kind of needs. And so I that's where it started for me. I was doing custom monitor controllers pretty much was my main thing that I would build. And I used to have this thing on the website. You could pretty much design it, get a price, and then put in an order, like without me having to do too much kind of quoting or whatever. But what I realized was that while, you know, that's a good idea in theory, right? Like solving people's problems, people can't really see that just because it's, you know, like they would kind of expect it to be the same price as something off the shelf, which is impossible. Like a custom one-off unit, it's like doing all the design work for a product and then only selling one of them. You know what I mean? It's actually not a very good. It's actually not a very good business model.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did that for a long time, and I was also heaps less busy back then, so it was fine. I was just and things were really different back then. Like it's changed heaps even in 10 years. Like now when we manufacture, I don't touch a drill, you know, like my enclosures arrive here powder coated, printed with holes in them. You know what I mean? Like I don't do any of that stuff. But back then I was like by hand, every single part of the process kind of thing. So I did that for ages, and then I pretty much stopped. I just like called it quits on that because I was so busy in the studio, and you know, it just wasn't. It's the same thing. Like I wasn't interested in doing it anymore. And then I started to get the fire again, but I knew it couldn't be the same business model as before. It's just too much to keep up with. Also, I hate letting people down. And if you tell someone, you know, I'm going to have this gigantic monitor controller ready for you in 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden a band books you for 2 of those weeks, it's like, oh man, like now I'm stressing. Like I don't know if I can get it to you in time. I hate that shit. And so basically, when I thought I'll just start building the products I know will sell well, and I'll keep them in stock as much as I can, or at least I won't take anyone's money until I know I can deliver a thing by a date. And that's when it's funny, I just called my friend Pat, who's like the most amazing, beautiful human. And I owe this whole Franklin Audio business, you know, partially to him. You know, I contacted him originally because he's a graphic designer and he's also a musician. And I just wanted a logo. I was like, can you do a new logo for me? And he was like, yeah, man, I mean, I can just do a logo, but like that, I don't want to do that. I want to help you make a brand, not a logo. You know what I mean? He's like, a logo is nothing, you know, like, and so he was the one that really ignited the kind of decision to turn it into a real kind of thing. And you know, the look, the way that he makes the products look, and his vibe, his eye for, you know, it's great because how often do you meet a designer, branding guy who's also a musician? So he knows what gear is supposed to look like, you know.
Yeah.
So he kind of convinced me to take the plunge, and before I kind of knew it, I was like, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it kind of properly. And I, you know, invested a bunch of money in it, and we did it properly, everything from the packaging to the branding to the website and yada yada yada. It's finding a market. It's finding people who are kind of resonating with the ethos of the brand, and it actually pretty much it kind of saved me in a weird way because that period where I closed the studio, you know, you probably experienced a similar thing. You're stressing about how on earth you're going to actually make any money when you don't have a studio to record people. And right as that I was closing that down, the sales of the electronic stuff was kind of on the way up. So it really you know, gave me something to fall back on a little bit.
And that must be all over the world, right?
Yeah. So the keyboard switcher product especially sells particularly well in Europe. We had a couple of pretty cool things. So like the Chemical Brothers bought one, and that band Dunyan, or however you say it. I think they're like a Swedish band. Like a couple of kind of, I don't know. They're like in the synth world kind of influential or whatever. So we had a couple of European buyers that that kind of put it on the map a little bit over there. And we sell more of those to overseas than we do in Australia. The Reamp box sells better here. It's not our best seller just because there are alternatives to that product which are great. Whereas the keyboard switch is a truly touch wood unique product, at least for now. And we've got
Until
some new
Behringer make their version of it for $20.
I every day I wake up, I'm waiting to wake up with a DM saying, "Hey, this looks a hell of a lot like your."
Yeah, and then you're going to have to decide whether to engage the lawyers or not.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Behringer are kind of like the Aldi of the
they
audio
are, aren't
world.
they? Yeah. It's
Just
funny.
take
I kind
other
of
people's products and repackage it as their own.
Oh yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I have mixed emotions about that stuff. I mean, on one hand, I'm like, oh, it's cool that, like, you know, for me, growing up, all my first audio gear was Behringer. Like I used to I used to get the. Do you remember the shop Venue Music? It was down in the city.
Yes, absolutely, I do.
Yeah. So I lived in Coffs Harbour, but I used to get the Venue Music printed catalog delivered to home. And I would. It was a lot of Behringer at the time for whatever reason, and I would pour through this Venue Music catalog and like dream of what thing I might be able to, you know, save up my pocket money for or get, you know, convince mum and dad for, you know, birthday or Christmas or whatever. And you know, it enabled me to kind of get going in the, you know, I used to have Behringer mixers and microphones and, you know, whatever else.
Did you have a composer, the compressor?
Yeah, absolutely. That thing
I felt like
classic.
everyone had a Behringer composer.
I wonder where they all are now. Probably in the landfill or storerooms.
Landfill, definitely.
Yeah. But you know, so in that regard, I think like these cheap brands actually do serve a purpose. You know, I think it's cool
Absolutely.
that it's there. I don't like when it's not cool, I reckon, to like blatantly rip off someone who's still making the product. I reckon that's kind of like And they use the fact that they have huge power, like they're a big company with lots of money. You know, Moog is not going to take Behringer to court. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and they've probably got teams of people making sure that they're just skirting the lines of what's legal. You know, so it's just a
like
weird,
Aldi.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
the Aldi of music gear. But maybe it would be. Maybe it's flattering if Behringer, you know, that's when you know you've made it, if Behringer steals your idea.
Yeah, you can just hang your hat off that for the rest of your life. When you were talking before about, you said you got really busy. You said you were making these products and then you got really busy with the production. Was there a catalyst for that you remember?
Yeah, actually, big time. And it was kind of, it was probably around, I want to say that we're talking about 6 or 7 years ago is when I finally, I feel like kind of started going like, oh yeah, this is, you know, my work now, properly. You know, I've been doing it for ages, but you know, it was actually a moment. This is going to sound so cliche, but I just finished a session, and it was so late. Like, I don't know. It was just one, you know, those ones that just, they go on. I was also at the time not very good at regulating my work hours. When we worked at Linear as well, it was just like, it was part of the course that if a producer or whoever was using the studio wanted to stay till midnight, you were just there till midnight. It's just how it kind of went. And I remember just driving home from the studio super late, like, you know, everything in my life was a little bit of a shambles at that point as well, which you can get away with in your mid-20s. It was fine, but I was like partying, then going to sessions and partying and like eating badly. And, you know, because you're forever like, I'm driving home at midnight. Like, what the fuck am I going to eat? I'm going to Stanmore Macca's. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not. Yeah. And so I remember thinking like, I just worked like so crazy, you know, for the last fortnight or whatever, and not in a kind of in a good way, just like in a kind of chasing my tail kind of way, because I was trying to build all these monitor controllers and I had sessions at Linear or whatever, and I I was like kind of like looking at my bank account going, this doesn't make any sense. Like I work so much, or I feel like I'm working so much, probably exacerbated by being like hungover all the time. But I was just like, this just doesn't compute. Like there should be more money in my bank account given like how much I work. And I went through this, it's kind of embarrassing, but I went through like a bit of a self-help, like kind of, you know,
phase.
finance bro phase.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because it did put me through a few years of like really good, you know, financial situations where I could kind of set myself up. So that was the catalyst to get busy, but get busy properly and actually make a lot of money. So, and a few things I sorted out.
So it was the self-help kind of phase that did that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I decided
Wow.
like, okay, like if you're not happy with how the work's going, you need to be like, you know, I started, you know, reaching out to artists that I would like to work with, and I started following up all the time. And I had a proper regimented kind of like, all right, on Mondays, you know, I'm keeping it for just doing this type of work. And, you know, I just kind of basically organized myself. And before long, like actually really quite quickly, I was like back to back, you know, booked out at the studio and actually making like for the first time in my life, I what I would consider like adults' money. You know, like I was like, you know, like did a tax
What's
return.
that feel like, earning adult money?
I can't. I don't do it anymore. I can't remember. So yeah, I went through
very interesting.
Yeah, and it was good because I mean, probably went unhealthily too far into like the hustle and grind, like kind of like I was up every morning at 5 running and like, you know, we're gonna, you know, seize the day, yada yada yada. But it was good, like it was at pretty much at the same time that we built the studio in Leichhardt, or maybe just a little bit before that, and. You know, I actually think if I wanted to, I think if anyone really wanted to work every day in the studio, you can just make it happen. It's you know, it's there. I guess priorities change though. Like for me, I realized that being in the studio every single day is not actually what makes me enjoy life. You know, yeah. So the catalyst was just like pretty much engaging with it and actually making it happen. You know.
That's amazing. I think for me, the catalyst was getting the studio.
Yeah.
Before I took over the studio, which was in 2010, up until that point, I'd been a freelance producer. And so if people had to book me and pay me to produce their record, they'd also have to pay for studio time. Yeah. And all of a sudden, getting the studio meant that they only just had to pay me and they got everything that they needed. And then when I had to leave the studio, then there was the panic of what if they only wanted me for the space?
Yeah.
You know, thankfully that hasn't proved to be the case in the kind of 18 months since.
Yeah, that's great. And as you've probably found, I don't think like the kinds of artists that we want to work with, they're not booking spaces. They don't really care about walls. You know what I mean? They might compliment you on your studio space and say, this place is rad, but that's not the reason they're there. Yeah. They're there to make a record with you. When I was an in-house engineer at Linear, the only kind of bands that just booked the studio space because it was a studio space, they were usually the worst ones to work with. You know what I mean? Like they weren't, they either weren't mature enough yet to realize that it's the person that makes your record that makes it sound the way it does, not the room. But also they were usually, you know, weirdly obsessed with audio equipment, which I'm just so over. You know, it's just...
Which is weird because you're such a technical, you're such a technically proficient guy, and you're someone that knows a lot about electronics, which is something that I know very little about. And I'm not proud of it, but I've just never been able to wrap my head around it. So for you to, you know, you've got this thing where on one hand you're gear obsessed and on the other hand you're not gear obsessed.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's partially because I do know about what's going under the hood, and what I kind of realize is, you know, as much as people would like to believe that some pieces of gear are like there's some, you know, like literal magic going on, Like the actual electronic difference between like a Neve pre and an API pre is so minimal. Like, yes, they sound different. We're not, you can measure the difference between them, but the reasons that they sound different. I mean, all mic pre's are just an op amp, sometimes input transformers, sometimes output transformers, sometimes both. Those are the main variables. Everything else is just there to facilitate functionality, like phantom power. That's why I kind of like people will gush over they obviously, people love Neves, right? Like that's the thing, like, and I do too, but once I, had a look under the hood of like the, much cheaper heritage one and I can see that the right bits are there, I just don't really think about that anymore. And I'm not the kind of person that needs to have the one that says Neve on it. That said, as I do obsess over details when it's my own thing, because I really want the stuff that we build to go out into the world, as good as it can be. Like yesterday I was sitting there literally auditioning different values of resistors in one spot in a circuit and like measuring and listening and measuring and listening. I do care about stuff, but once it's at a point where, I know that that's a good quality piece of gear, I'm not I'm not too fast.
So are your ears that finely tuned that you can hear the difference between resistors, or do you need the measurement?
No, I mean, in that particular situation, the resistor, it kind of changes where an EQ point kind of moves, so it was pretty obvious. But no, I don't think I'm any kind of golden ears type person. I don't know if this is going to be. This might, people are funny about this stuff, but I don't reckon even the people that claim to hear, these differences sometimes actually can. I'm a big fan of Eric Valentine. I don't know if you've seen any of his. He's an American producer, but he's got weirdly he's probably a lot of parallels with me. He's a music producer, but he has an electronics company, and they he's done Queens of the Stone Age and big artists or whatever. And his company, Undertone Audio, crazy people, they've stopped now because it's probably completely unfeasible, but they used to make a console like that. That was one of the products that they made, like a huge console. And when they were developing the console, his electronics designer guy would come in and say, "Hey, Eric, I'm going to pop new modules in the console. I've changed these capacitors. I think what you're going to notice is like the top end is a lot more open and yada, yada, yada." Pretty much just tell him, what he was going to hear. And lo and behold, on the next session, Eric would use the new modules and go like, "Oh yeah, he's right. The top end is much more open and yada, yada." And then it kind of tweaked one day, and he said to him, "Next time you make a change to the modules, don't tell me what you did. Just put them in the console." And then he was like, all of a sudden the differences between the the revisions of the console started becoming very minute, if not inaudible. And I think our ears are, it's not just our ears, it's our ear brain system, right? And so I don't think any comparison is truly valid unless there's a measurable difference. And I know people will argue about that, but I'm like, we have test equipment that measures the most minute changes in frequency response, distortion, transient response. Like, we can measure all aspects of this stuff. If there's no measurable difference, I don't believe us dumb apes can actually hear the difference. But people will, say yada yada yada. And totally. I think all comparisons need to be done, in a proper blind A/B fashion. Otherwise, any preconceived idea will, it will always affect you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like me hating amp sims because of Guitar Rig 1. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. From 2006 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And then me forever thinking, "Oh no, I hate guitar, sims." You know what I mean? Always. Yeah. And if I knew which one was the real amp and which one was the guitar sim, I would be like, "Oh yeah, the real amp sounds better." Like.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm sure there are people with incredible ears. I don't think I necessarily consider myself one of those people. But I like to see.
That's a good thing in many ways, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean,
Imagine if you were so caught up with that tiny minutiae that I think one of the things I love about your productions, and I've told you this in the past, you're one of my favorite local producers in the sense that every time I hear a record of yours, there's what I would describe as a cool factor. I love
thanks,
the
man.
way you make music sound. Do you have like a set creative process for each project, either when it comes to mixing or mastering or recording, or is it completely arbitrary and you just go with the flow project to project?
I'd say I probably used to have a little bit more of a set process, because I used to primarily do bands, like 99% bands, and so I think that kind of partially dictates how you make records. I was very, very used to putting a whole band, not necessarily in the same room, but in a room together and playing, like I did that for so many years, because that's the way I was taught to do it at Linear. Like Chris is, I assume, haven't heard from him for a long time, but is a tape machine guy. He was all about putting bands together so that they can see one another and play. And for probably the first 10 years of me making records, that's how I did it. That's how I knew to do it. It was an abstract concept to layer one musician at a time to me. And at the time, I don't know if it's my imagination, it must just be the type of people that I work with now, or maybe a change in the scene. I don't find as many bands actually capable of performing that way. Maybe it's just because that's how it was done, even 10 years ago. And so I used to have a process pretty much locked down. I used to be able to quote for a job so simply, because you'd be like, well, I know we're going to need like 2 days to do all the bed tracks, and then we're going to need like this many days to do the guitar overdubs, and this many days for vocals, this many days for mixing. It's going to cost this much. I find it so much more variable when you start going down, which I am very much now. I haven't done a band in ages. Now I pretty much just work with like artists who write songs. With that stuff, I don't think I either haven't figured it out yet, or I don't know if I ever will, a process for that. I like to just, I'll usually do a little bit of preparatory work on their song before they're in the room, because I don't like trying to come up with a vibe while someone's sitting right there. I always feel like a bit of pressure to like pull out some magic straight away. I'll usually get them to send me their chords and words first, and I'll make a bit of maybe I'll do a quick mock-up of the first verse and chorus, and I'll sort of, when I email it to them, I was like, I just had to spare 5 minutes this afternoon. What do you reckon about this? I probably spent an entire day making this this vibe.
Right.
And just say,
so your advice is lie to your clients.
Oh, never tell the truth.
No, I know what you mean, but part of that is the fear that they're not going to like it. So if you just tell them, oh, this was just a quick mock-up, and they turn around and go, oh, look, it's not the vibe we're going for, you're also putting them under less pressure than if you say, I've spent all day working on this. Yeah. What do you think? They're under more pressure. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I don't want them to feel as though I've pigeonholed or sort of backed them into a corner with the vibe of, this is what the song's going to be like. The one part of the process that I do consistently, and I think works really, really well, is like making them give me like songs for inspiration. Like I used to kind of downplay the importance of references, but I actually now see it more as like, show me the songs you like, and then dig in a little bit more and say like, is this just a song you like, or is there a sound or a sonic palette or a texture in this song that makes you feel, because it might just turn out it's the vocal melody that they like, you know what I mean? Or it might actually be they specifically want that drum sound, or I find that's kind of easier.
It's that whole thing of, send us some reference tracks, and you might be working on a, singer-songwriter ballad, and they send you some EDM banger.
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
And you're like, what is the purpose of this reference? Oh, I like the way that sounds.
Yeah. But it's funny because, and I think you're very good at this, and I try to be better all the time. It's easy to be cynical about, especially, you've been making records, longer than I, but we do it all the time, right? We we're no strangers to this process, but most artists maybe get to make a couple of albums in their life, you know? And when you say, when I give you a reference, I'm fucking good at that because I've been doing music long enough to know what a reasonable reference track is, you know?
Yes.
I think, it's good to get a reality check every now and then, and you know, when they send you a silly reference, maybe there is a reason in there. You know what I mean? Maybe it's like you realize, like, oh, I just figured it out. It's the delivery of the vocal, you know, and maybe that is something we can bring into the track or whatever. So nice. I like to sort of, I guess, start with the refs and then almost treat them like colors on the on the palette, you know, like it's we're going to take a little bit of the percussion vibe from this song. And, it's like when I was last year, I had such a nice week with the Polish Club guys making a record. I haven't done one in that way for so long, like full tape machine, band in a room, you know, proper old school, play the songs from start to finish. And the riff all week was, if you rip off enough artists in a single song, no one can tell which which artist you're ripping off.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I think
so
that's
spread out your plagiarism.
Exactly.
Yeah, reference tracks are an interesting one. I'm kind of with you. I used to downplay them a lot more. And I always thought that reference tracks meant that you were just trying to make someone else's record, but I've kind of softened to it, particularly since I left the studio and I've been working remotely.
Yep.
I don't know why. It's just been I've embraced it a bit more, I suppose, and I don't feel like it's kind of cheating or disingenuous anymore. It feels just like another tool.
Of course,
to create
absolutely.
What you want.
I mean, it's not
How do you... Oh, sorry. You go.
I was just going to say, it's not like a painter has never looked at a painting. You know what I mean? You can't kind of go through your life ignoring... Obviously, you don't want to... The painter doesn't go and then paint, you know, something that looks just like this other one. But I think it's kind of... if you flip it over, it's kind of like it's ignorant to think that you can make just amazing art without taking into consideration the culture of the music that you're trying. The person that inspired me a lot was Eric J. Like, I did 3 or 4 sessions with Eric J at Linear, and like that was when I saw what like a proper pro producer works like, and I was like, oh my god, like I learned so much from him. He was talking about when he got the opportunity to mix the Chet Faker record. And it was a big deal, and they were doing that annoying thing that big artists do where they actually get the same song mixed by like a bunch of different mixing engineers, and then it's kind of like a shootout or whatever. And then I guess whoever's one is the best probably gets the rest of the record or whatever. And he was so hell-bent on getting that record that he like phoned Nick Murphy, the Chet Faker guy, and was like talking to him about what music he loves, and like he spent like a week before starting the mix listening to music that he hadn't listened to before to try and like immerse himself in what it was that was making him. And then he said like he just felt actually equipped to mix then, and you know he still labored it over it for days, and he said he was so nervous. It's nice to hear a big American record producer feel nervous to send out a mix, you know what I mean, like because I think we all know that that feeling from when you hit send
every
like,
time,
why
single time.
Oh, why haven't they written back?
Yeah. And so, did he get the gig?
Yeah. He mixed the whole album. They loved it, and he was up against like the big name kind of mixing engineers. And I just thought, well, if Eric J, can listen to the refs and absorb them and take that time and that care, then I think the rest of us probably kind of can, as well. So yeah, I think
that's
they're
real. That's another thing I've learned. I learned a couple of things talking to Jimbo yesterday that kind of changed my perception on things, and that just talking with you now has kind of made me have a slightly different perspective on references, and that is you're not trying to recreate someone else's record. What you're trying to do is get really into the mind of the artist that you're working with and really find out what they love. And I suppose there's no limit to how far you can go into trying to, create their vision.
Yeah, exactly. And you might find out
that's unreal.
Yeah, sometimes they're hearing something in the ref that, like I'll often say like, oh, I don't really see how, that drum sound's going to work on this song. And they'll be like, drums? Oh, I'm not listening to that. They're like, I hadn't even really paid any particular attention to the drums.
Yeah. So how often when you're mixing or mastering and you put up your mix or master against a reference, how often do you go, shit, it's actually as good? And how often do you go, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a complete fraud.
Oh man, probably like 20/80 or something. I don't know. You know what? Mastering is a funny one. And this is something just from a practical standpoint that comes up a lot. Even just like last week, a regular client of mine that I've mastered lots and lots of stuff for kind of came back and was like, I love the sound of these masters, man, but do you reckon they could be a bit louder? And I'm thinking in my head, louder? Fuck, they're pretty fucking loud. Like, I'm like, okay. And then I was like, can I call you? And he was like, yeah, now it's fine. And I phoned him. I'm like, how are you checking the loudness of these masters? And he's like, oh, well, I'm playing them in the Dropbox app on my phone, and then I'm switching over to Spotify and I'm playing, and I was like, oh, okay, let me explain. You're not hearing, these applications have different output levels. You're not hearing the same thing, yada, yada. I actually very rarely use mastering references for anything other than the tonality, and I actually find them useful, especially, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear if you find this. I hear low and top end very differently first thing in the morning to when later on in the day when I've, if I've been working, and not from like I don't listen loudly. I'm not pummeling my hearing into the ground during the day or anything. I just noticed that, and even day to day, something that sounded quite bassy to me yesterday might not as much. And what I actually use the references for is like more of almost a calibration, like I'll just put on some music that I'm listening to a lot of at the moment. And, that sort of gives me today's, lighthouse to kind of go, oh, okay, that's how loud bottom end is,
That's cool. I like that. I remember thinking that I used to put on different reference tracks. So say you'd be working on a drum sound. So you'd go, okay, I'll put on 4 of my favorite tracks for their drum sound. You put on one and you compare it to yours and you go, oh my God, that kick drum is so much louder than mine and my snare's too loud. So you turn up your kick and then you turn down your snare. Then you listen to your next favorite track. You go, oh my God, that kick drum is so quiet and the snare is so loud. So I found that references for me a lot of the time are just to remind me that anything is okay, so long as it feels good.
Yeah, I'm very rarely trying to match the tone or the because you can't. Like if someone gives you a guitar track, it just inherently will sound different to every other guitar in the world. Like it can't. I'm not. Yeah, I very rarely am flicking back and forth with a ref. I just use it to remind myself what music sounds like, because sometimes you're in a Pro Tools session and you're just like, you're losing sight of the big picture here. Let's listen to an actual song. And as you say, sometimes you're like, oh, what, it's, sometimes you go, oh, wow, I was stressing about this mix, but we're actually sounding better than the ref. So let's just keep going here. Yeah. So it's not a big deal. What I do a lot of though, is I actually use previous versions of the song as one of my main points of reference. So if it's a producer's rough mix, I'll always have that ready to go so I can make sure because once or twice way early on, I definitely, because I wasn't doing that, I've definitely done like full mixes that were shitter than my own rough mix. You know what I mean? Like taking it away from where it needs to be.
Totally.
So yeah, I find those,
and that's the beauty of it, right? The beauty of it is being able to try things and listen back and go, oh, that's not as good. That's fine. Oh, yeah. I'll keep going until it's great. 100%. I think a lot of people, and probably up and coming artists and producers, will fail and just totally freak out about it. But I've forgotten who it was recently that said, I read a quote from Michael Jordan, and he said, I failed more than everyone else. That's why I succeeded, because he tried and tried and tried and failed and failed and failed and learnt. And so, a failure, for want of a better word, failure is such a good teacher. I mean, it's the best teacher.
Yeah, and it can be like super frustrating, but so like with electronics, I have more of an understanding than probably most, audio engineers, right? But compared to my friends who are, two of my best friends, Locke and John. John is Bondi FX. He's a super successful guitar pedal guy. They are proper electronics engineers, right? And compared with them, my knowledge is low, and I will, I bug them a lot. They're very, very kind and generous with their time when I'm trying to figure stuff out. But like yesterday, I had something up and I was just trying a new circuit and it wasn't right and I couldn't figure out the problem. And for most of the day, I was failing. You know what I mean? In inverted commas, I was to the point where I'm like, Jesus, it's been a bit of a waste of time, this one. But like when I figured out what the issue was, I will never forget that problem now. Like I understand this circuit so comprehensively now, having gone through it, trying to figure out why it wasn't doing the thing I wanted it to do. And I think it's the same with mixing, right? Like you bang your head against the wall trying to make this thing slot together, and one day it happens and you go like, oh, right. And then you think about what was it that I did there that was different to what I normally do, and you just accrue this techniques and knowledge and I think failing. Also, the industry kind of lies to us. Like I grew, when I was first reading all the magazines and stuff and just getting into this, I was under the, you got Chris Lord-Alge going like, yeah, I do a mix in 3 hours, it's done. And I'm like, I slave over this thing for 2 days and I want to delete the entire thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then when when you sort of grow up and you meet peers and good friends like you and Pete and everyone and you realize everybody goes through the same shit. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly.
We're all just, making music is not a linear thing. You can't put a song should be mixed in this amount of time. Well, some songs maybe, but
And I think that's one of the main reasons I wanted to do this podcast is for people that are struggling with their own journey to production or mixing or songwriting, just to show that everyone struggles.
Oh, 100%.
And it's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're in the middle of a struggle.
Yeah, because making
you're not alone at that point.
Oh, and that's exactly right. And even the best of the best, that they might have mechanisms that make their life easy, so their struggle is not as bad. Like I don't think Michael Brower is getting unprepped stems to mix. You know what I mean?
No,
like
that's right. Exactly.
He's not going in and dealing with the minutiae of the breaths and whatever else. But
exactly,
it's a complex thing, and you can't compare what we do to any job. I don't think, because my dad's always just worked in like kind of traditional, like he was an electrician and then he kind of had another business. But, I don't think my dad's identity was caught up in the way that he stripped the wires. You know what I mean? But like we feel everything that we do so much. And if someone says like, hey, Mike, I don't really like the way the mix turned out or whatever, that's not, you don't just go like, oh, well, that's, we go like, oh no, that's part of me. It's a complicated thing.
That brings me to something I've been wanting to ask you. How do you deal with those moments where you might have done a mix or you come up with a part that you love and you play it to the artist and they go, yeah, we don't love that. How do you process that? What are the emotions that bubble up and how do you process those emotions?
I reckon pretty badly, but
Me too.
I think I'm learning to get better at it. A couple of things that have helped me a lot is learning a little bit more about mindfulness, and meditating, because not so much the act of meditating doesn't really help, but me being more aware of my emotions and my thoughts when they arise, and allowing me to be less reactionary and to take a minute. So, just like practical examples. If someone emails me back and says, "Hey man, yeah, that wasn't really the vibe," I'm capable of catching myself starting to feel like that, and then just have a quick think about it and go like, all right, well, he didn't say, "Fuck, you've got a big nose, you're a dickhead, Nick." What he said was he doesn't like some decisions that you made with a keyboard and a mouse. It's not the end of the world. I still feel it. Trust me, I still fully feel it. I've made a rule about, unless it's a project where we're trying to get it over the line that day, I pretty much won't write back to one of those emails in the moment ever now, because I look at some communication that I've had in the past and I cringe. I'm like, oh, you fucking idiot. Why did you get so defensive about that? Like, why didn't you just, I saw someone say the other day.
Can you give us an example
of the kind of things that I would have said?
Yeah.
I remember a real
only because I think this is helpful for people.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah. I remember I was one of the first, proper recordings that I'd done, and I was, it was like a kind of lo-fi. They wanted to sound like the Sonics, like a 60s rock thing, and it was a really cool band. And those projects where you feel quite invested in it because you like the music, and I was enthusiastic. And anyway, we'd recorded and everyone was really happy, and then I went away and did the mixes on my own. And I did a stupid thing. Like, I don't do this anymore. I sent all 4 mixes at once. Like I've mixed the entire EP and then I sent all of them. I never do that anymore. I'll mix one song, get it in the ballpark, and then I'll do the other 3, because now I know what you actually want. And I saw the email in the middle of the night. Like, I think I'd gotten up to go to the bathroom and I saw that there was notifications on my phone. And this is another thing that I won't never look at that stuff at night now. Anyway, I saw this email and it was like, it was actually worded quite politely from their end. I remember looking at it the next day. It was like someone snuck in and reworded their email, because the way I read it was like, yeah, we hate the mix. Here's some references. We actually want it to sound like this, blah, blah, blah. And I remember writing back in the heat of the moment, like in the middle of the night, like something like, yeah, but you're not that band. You guys aren't that band. So there's no way you're going to sound like that band. You know what I mean? Like, I pretty much, I tried to put it back on them. I didn't take any ownership. I said like, well, if you want to sound like Beck, you should be Beck. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, which that, now I think about it, I'm like, oh, you fuckwit. Why didn't you say, hey guys, no worries at all. Give me a couple of days and I'll take it in a different direction, and we'll see if, thanks for the refs. Let me take it in a different direction. But it is because it is emotional, you know what I mean? You put your time and your care into these things, and if someone turns around and says they don't like it, it's, it feels offensive in that moment.
Yeah.
How do you go with that stuff?
I sometimes don't deal with it well. I'm trying to get better at it. Same as you. I put every bit of my heart and soul into every record that I produce. And if I come up with something that I'm really excited about and I get an instant rejection of that idea, I go into a temporary funk. Yeah. How temporary it is dependent on a bunch of factors. And one of those factors is how the other person or artist has received it. So if I come up with a part and they straight away go, nah, I've got to go, okay, is that because it's not the right part for the song, or is it just because they're not used to it yet? There's all I kind of do all this mental gymnastics, but at the end of the day, I've definitely had moments where I have created unnecessary tension just by going into a bit of a funk. When you get into a mood and you can't get, you're in a shitty mood, you can't get out of it.
Yeah.
You feel a bit guilty about it, but you can't help it.
Yeah.
So I kind of try and tell my artists up front, I just say to them, look, sometimes I can, take stuff a bit too personally, and I can be a bit too invested to the point that I get, it's a roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think if you frame that from a point of view, if you explain to them the reason that I feel the feelings about this is it comes from a place of me caring about your music. I'm not,
exactly.
Where, I'm sure there are people who, don't feel much at all during the process of making a record, and they're there to go through the motions. Shit. And 100%. I mean, the number of times
a lot of people just want the check, right?
Yeah.
They just want to be paid and have the artist go, "Yep, that's great."
Yeah, yeah, and it's. What's the point of doing this? Yeah, I mean, good on you, I guess. I reckon if the check is what you want, surely there are easier ways to.
Absolutely. Yeah, to me, that's the one thing I struggle with more than any other aspect of making records is how you deal with your ideas being rejected, which I wanted your advice because I love the way you think and you strike me as someone who, isn't a knee-jerk kind of jerk.
I try not to be when I've got control of it. It also, for me, it depends on so much stuff. Like, if I've set aside a couple of days to mix a thing and I send it off and I'm like, cool, well, hopefully all that's left to do on that is, like a couple of tweaks and we'll be over the line. And they come back and they go, oh, not quite right. And also here's 5 more stems for you to slot into the mix and yada, yada, yada. And I have, and I've got work booked after that. Like I'll feel way more reactionary about that. But then I go like, well, they don't know you're booked,
That's right.
like, and if anything, that's a scheduling mishap on your part. Why haven't you left enough time for contingency to, happen here? I think it's good to take ownership over this. One thing, it's a pretty weird analogy, but when we first got our first dog, Vivian, she's a rescue greyhound, and she was very, she was timid around people. She growled at other dogs. She was a bit damaged from having been mistreated, and we got a dog trainer to help us out with stuff. And she said, anytime something bad happens with the dog, don't say like, oh, the dog has done something bad. Like, ask yourself, what did I do, wrong that could have prevented this situation from happening? If your dog growls at another dog, why did you put it in a position where where she was going to be confronted with another dog on the street? Or, if she,
interesting.
And I think it's a really hard thing to take ownership over. But like when I really look at it, if someone says like, yeah, we don't really dig the vibe of that mix, 99 times out of 100, if I'm honest, I'm like, okay, cool. I can see where I missed what you're actually going for there. I'm going to try to take some deep breaths and just go like, all right, well, bit of a waste of time there, but that's cool. We'll try and get it where it's got to go. It's really tricky though.
It sure is. Sorry, go.
No, nothing. No.
I was just going to say, how much do you see your role as being a psychologist?
Depends on the artist, I think. A lot, actually. I find artists well, it can kind of go two ways. You get the odd person who's really quite delusional about how good what they're doing is doing, and but the vast majority of artists I work with, at least, just like us, are often plagued with self-doubt, and they are worried about how what they're doing will be perceived, and how, especially singers. I mean, it's such a vulnerable thing to ask somebody to put their actual voice on a record, and to
sure is.
And to kind of put it out there, and they take blows just like we do. I worked with, we've both worked with Chris a lot, and when he put his last song out, some random person in the TikTok comments said something like something about his voice or something about something, and like, he just saw that when we were hanging out one day at the studio, and I could tell, when you can see somebody's like mood changes a bit, and you know,
man.
like, and like to him, that's the exact same feeling that we get when somebody says, "Nah, I hate that drum sound," or you know, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Except it's completely unfiltered because it's just jerks in the comment section of something.
Exactly.
You know, like,
yeah.
And so
you can get 100 comments saying "love your voice, man," and the one comment that says, "Oh, I hate your voice." Which one are you focusing on?
That's the one that you're going to remember. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Do you think is that just the human condition, or are there things that we can do to remind ourselves that we shouldn't be focusing on that at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I go through periods where, you know, and a lot of it can be circumstantial, where I find it really easy to focus on the positives, you know, like, and I often think to myself when I go through those periods, I'll just think, hold on to this feeling, remember what this feeling is, because it makes life easy if you can focus on the positive. I think it's probably wired into us because, you know, that same feeling that you get from, you know, an uncomfortable social situation, you know, it's probably just, you know, miswiring, you know, it's sending the same messages that shit, there's a, you know, fucking tiger is going to eat you or something, you know what I mean? We're pretty flawed as, you know, as physical objects, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, this is statistically, you know, a thing, like artists and musicians are way more predisposed to mental health conditions and, you know, anxiety and depression. And I don't know if it's that draws us to art, or if it's the fact that we do art that makes us that way. But there is an undeniable link between, you know, percentages of people suffering those kinds of things. And so I think we probably are a little bit more, you know, likely to take those blows in a bad kind of way, you know?
Have you ever, and obviously you don't have to answer this, but have you ever suffered from mental health issues and specifically in relation to work?
Definitely. So first part, clinically diagnosed depression and anxiety. I think it's pretty hard to untangle it from what it does with work, because because I have you probably have the same thing. I have a pretty hard time seeing the difference between what is work and what is just my life.
Which is a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, if you don't care, if you don't feel like this is your life, then I don't know why you'd be, you know, doing it. But what I've trying to grapple with a little bit sometimes is, if I'm having a bad day, I don't want that to affect the session or somebody's project, you know what I mean? But like, if I wake up one day and I just don't have the energy to sit at a computer and try and make music, but that's what we're booked in for, it's a kind of it's a weird thing. But that said, like the last year of not doing so much face to face and doing things a little bit more at a leisurely pace, or more at the pace that I feel like doing it, I'm finding is actually working better for me personally. Like, just so that I can give someone a more vague deadline and say, hey, I'm going to mix that track. It'll be sometime this week, you know. And then if I wake up on Monday excited and ready to go on this track, I'll do it, you know. But if I don't feel like doing it, I know I can, you know, it's chilled. No one's coming in today to sit over my shoulder and kind of watch me. That's right. Watch me doing it. But you know, all in all, compared to places that I've been, I'm not saying like I feel good. I see a professional when I need to. I know the triggers of things that can make me feel certain things, and I think people mightn't see what we do as like a high stress thing, because I suppose to some people they probably see like proper jobs as as being stressful things. Yeah. But we live and breathe it. It can be a stressful thing. What about you? I mean, again, like obviously, only speak about what you want to, but have you experienced mental health related stuff?
Anxiety, definitely. First kind of became a thing for me in about 2003.
Okay.
And I remember the moment it happened. I went for a run and I got to the top of a set of stairs and I was sucking in the big ones. And I thought, what happens if I hyperventilate? What does hyperventilating mean? I don't have a brown paper bag. What? And I just thought, what if I have a panic attack and can't breathe? And that I just went very quickly down a rabbit hole of being terrified of walking upstairs in case I had a panic attack. And and luckily I saw an amazing psychologist and I told her about it and I'm cutting obviously a very long story very short.
Short,
right?
yeah.
She said, you're talking about anxiety as if it's an external invading force that's come into your life. And I pictured it like Dementors in Harry Potter, you know, looking out, oh God, there's anxiety. She said, anxiety is your body's early warning system to deal with stress. And she said, when you touch a hot plate, you feel pain to tell you to stop touching that hot plate. Anxiety is your body's way of saying you need to deal with stress. And she said, are you, what stresses you? And I went, I'm not a very stressed person. You know, I felt like, you know, what have I got to be stressed about? But I thought, well, my house was a mess and I was behind on my tax and I needed to do all my paperwork. And so I went home that night. I tidied the shit out of my house and had paperwork everywhere, got it all done, got my tax up to date. And I had this immense relief. And I remember the moment where I went, if it wasn't for anxiety, I wouldn't be feeling this amazing right now. Thank you, anxiety. And so now if I get any pangs of anxiety, which thankfully I don't get too often and too intensely, but if I do get it, I know that I've got to go and sit by the water because that's my happy place. If I just sit by the water, dangle my feet in or whatever, I know that I've got to do whatever I can to minimize stress. Now, obviously, sometimes you can't eliminate it. You might have a crazy work schedule and crazy deadline. But if that's the case, I go, okay, I can't do anything about that. But what can I do? You know? And one of the things I know is I can go and sit by the water, you know? And so I would leave 10 minutes early for the studio on those, you know, there was 1 week that I was double booked. So I was literally in the studio from 9 a.m. till 2 a.m. for about 10 days straight. And I would make sure that I got 10 minutes early. I would go down to the local dog park at Annandale by the water. Dogs would come up to me. I'd pat them. And just that 10 minutes was enough for me to kind of say to my body, I hear you. I'm not ignoring the anxiety and just wishing that it would magically go away. I'm thanking it for alerting me to what I need to be alerted to. And so it actually became my friend rather than my enemy. And I wrote a blog about it, which I might link below.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
It was just an incredible lesson to learn from this amazing counselor.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I think the coping mechanisms.
It's terrifying when it first happens.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also, I think a lot of people live with things without necessarily having a name for it or putting a name on it. I think a little bit of having some kind of coping mechanism, whatever that might be. Like in your example, you have like a ritualistic kind of coping mechanism, like where, all right, well, if I go down to the dog park in the morning, I think it can sometimes be as simple as acknowledging the feeling can be enough to kind of get you through it. When it's just a vague, as you say, like a thing that you feel like is external, you feel kind of helpless, right?
Yeah.
But I think generationally it's good. Like my little brother is quite a lot younger than me, and I see that speaking about mental health is so not taboo amongst his group of friends, and I think that will just get better and better as time goes on, as we tend to get a little bit more progressive. And I think it's cool because then, someone might be like, oh, right, that's what you're talking about right now is what I have been feeling. I just didn't really know that was depression, or I didn't know that was anxiety. I just thought that was something that everybody felt, or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. I drew great inspiration from Josh's post recently.
So I love that.
Just for the audience, Nick and I are on a Facebook page called Producer Therapy, and it's basically a chance for music producers just to vent and talk about stuff. And one of the guys on the page recently essentially said, I haven't enjoyed it for a long time. I want to quit and become a postie. And he became a postie, and he said, I've always loved motorbikes and I want to ride a motorbike around all day. And I found that incredibly inspiring, and I was thinking of I'd love to interview him on the podcast because I think that could really help a lot of people.
Oh, I think you absolutely should.
And clearly the last thing I want to do in this podcast is discourage people from a musical career, but you definitely want to educate people into the pitfalls of what this career can be like, and it burns a lot of people out. And so, question for you: are you still in love with it as much as you ever were?
I'm more in love with certain aspects of it than I've ever been, and I'm no longer interested in some aspects of it. And I think what we do is it's so diverse and far-reaching that I don't think it needs to be black and white. So, for example, I used to be obsessed with taking it like right from the finish to the end. Like I would record the songs, I would produce the songs, I would engineer every aspect of it. I would be at every session. I would, I would feel the need to, make a decision at every single juncture. I would mix it, I would master it,
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that anymore. And like from the outside, that could be perceived as like, oh, he's kind of lost his passion for it. If anything, it's the opposite. Like my care for the music and my care for being able to give the artist that I'm working with my best self means that if I need strings on a song, I don't need to go to that session. I've heard the arrangement. I'm happy. If Michael Tan can just record it, cool. I don't need to be the person that puts the mic above the violin. I'm not in love with putting mics on stands anymore. I'll tell you that. I'm just not that. I used to want to put mics on drums all the time, and because it's fascinating and it's fun. And sometimes I still do it for fun, but I'm not in love with that anymore. I'm in love with hearing the song when it's done. I'm in love with when somebody like tears up and gives me a hug when they hear their mix down, because I'll never ever lose my passion for that stuff. But
Absolutely.
at some point, I'm not in. So weird answer to your quite simple question, but I am in love with it. As in, all I want to do every day is come in this little room and tinker around with stuff. But sometimes all I want to do is get my guitar pedals over there and plug them in a different order and see what happens. And I have that like childlike kind of play. I want to know what happens when this happens. You know what I mean? And I get that original feeling that I had from this. But sitting there punching a drummer in every 3 bars to try and get some semblance of a performance, I'm not in love with that.
Totally. So, one of the great things about the whole remote thing has been I don't record as many guides as I used to. So back when I had the studio, it would always start the same. Come in, we'll put down a guide guitar to a click and a guide vocal. And I mean, that can be excruciating, just that bit. Now, the vast majority of the time, the artist has recorded all that at home. They're sending it through to you. I don't miss that part of it.
No,
at all.
Oh God, no.
And it comes down to what you're saying about Michael Brower, probably isn't sitting there having to prep the stems for the session. I would love a world where the stems I get sent are perfectly labeled. There's already my effects chains, and you can get templates and all that kind of stuff to speed up that. But I mean, that'd just be the dream, right? Where you're literally just playing with the musical results.
Of course, and it can be hard to maintain. Like, I'll use your guides example. Like, when you finally get someone through the guide, guitar, and vocal, sometimes it could take hours, as you know, to get one where you're like, okay, cool. Well, now this is good enough for the other musicians to play along with. It's really hard to then have the energy to go like, all right, cool. Well, now let's pull the best drum sound ever and record drums over this thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't think, I think in a really romanticized version of what we do, people probably think like, oh, you must just love going into the studio every day. And I'm like, not every day, like and I think all passions are like this, right? Some people are, I've got friends who are, incredible woodworkers, and I just think, oh man, you've got that gorgeous wood shop in the back of your house with all the tools that I would ever want. You must just love going out there. And they're like, yeah, some days I love going out there, but some days I just don't even want to switch the lights on, like I think it's normal to, my love for the different parts of the process kind of seem to, change and swing around, and, just depending on what I'm kind of obsessed with at that, that particular moment.
Do you see a day, even the possibility of a day that you do what Josh did and you go, fuck it, I'm quitting and becoming a postie or whatever?
No, I don't think so. Just because I think I've always, I've sort of become like a bit of a, I hate to use the phrase jack of all, I like the phrase jack of all trades, you know what I mean? Like, I'm glad that I have all of these different weird things. I think that's enough to keep me feeling like engaged in the thing. I can see periods like right now where I'm actually not going to take on any new specifically recording jobs just for a few months because I'm feeling a little bit burnt out on recording. I can tell I'm not giving my full self. So I'm just going to do a few months where, because I've got to get these new products out and stuff. I'm mostly going to do electronics and mastering. Maybe I'll do 1 or 2 little recording gigs. And I kind of keep things on a bit of a cycle. I don't think there's a world where I'll get out of music. I can't sort of see that happening. But that being said, when I read Josh's thing, there are feelings in there that I think we can all relate to, right? Like the burnout of just, and I think it was interesting. It was nice to see everybody in that thread just kind of go like, hearing you loud and clear, brother. Like, it was resonating with people. And nothing is forever, right? As well. I mean, we might find in a year's time, Josh has got his fire back, and he's doing a day a week of sessions again or something. Like it. I think there's a fear as well.
Everyone's. Sorry, go on. Fear of what?
I think an unnecessary fear sometimes that if you're out of the industry for a bit, that you lose all your. I've certainly felt this. I worried about this when I closed the studio. It's like, if I step out of the game a little bit, are people going to kind of go like, oh no, Nick doesn't really record anymore, or I think people worry about that. But the thing is, no one's actually really paying that much attention to you. Like I've got I've probably got friends who don't know I do anything other than music, and they don't know about my electronics business. I've got people that I know that probably only think I do the electronics business. No one's really paying that much that much attention.
Yeah. Well, they're not, because, I'll talk to people on the phone and they'll say, oh, so what are you doing? Oh, I've moved up to Foster. They're like, oh, cool. Are you still doing music? And there's that horrible ego part of me that goes, haven't you been checking out all the music that I've been sharing? And people don't give a shit about my life the way I do.
No, that's the thing. Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't remember the specifics of it. I remember listening to a podcast about a study where they made people enter a room late intentionally by telling them that the meeting was at the wrong time, right? And then they would ask people questions like, what color was the lady that came to the meeting super late? What color shirt was she wearing or whatever? And most of the people in the room were like, oh, sorry, I don't even remember someone coming in late. But that person was painfully aware of the fact that they were late,
Yes. Yeah.
People are mostly caught up in their own shit.
Absolutely. And it's it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's an important one, isn't it? That
definitely.
Other people aren't stressing over the decisions you make like you are.
No.
Yeah. Man, thank you so much for the chat.
Oh man,
I feel
my pleasure.
I mean, we do talk all the time, but I feel like we could talk for hours, and we might have to do a second part at some point.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, I just looked at the time. I can't believe we've just been talking for so long. It feels easy. It was a blast.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I'll put some links where people can check you out, just so long as they don't want to book you to record in the next few months.
Yeah, exactly.
But you are someone that is just and I mean this in the most sincere of ways. You're a real beacon of light in many ways, and the way you interact with people online, the generosity with your time that you give me, and I always feel like a little puppy dog ringing you up, and I'm like, you know how I always say, sorry to bother you, man. You're like, that's cool. So, it's just, not only are you an exceptional talent, but you're a real great egg. You're a bloody good human being. And thank you so much for everything you do. And thanks for sharing your insights with me and the hopefully more than 5 people that listen to this podcast. You know what it's like. We're used to doing these things, and in my mind, I'm thinking maybe this podcast series could do really well, but it could just be like everything else that you do that gets an audience of 9.
Well, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? You got to
exactly right.
Got to put it out there, and you never know. Sometimes these things, they have a funny way of happening. There's sometimes the thing you're least expected to be the one to to take off. Might be the one.
And look, at the end of the day, if one person hears this and something that you've said helps them, then it's been worth it, right?
Absolutely. And even if we weren't recording, I would have been super stoked to just have this chat. It was so nice.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you, brother.